All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Tuomisto-Bell, and I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you to my friend Kristen for inviting me to be a part of this event today. She and I did our teacher training together in 2010. So it's very nice to be here with everyone. This is a mythology storytelling experience that I hope you all enjoy. It is a non-asana experience, which means we won't be doing any movement. And there is a traditional opening invocation for classes that are non-asana, and it is Sahana Bhavatu. So if you're at home and you're familiar with this chant, please feel free to join me in the privacy of your own home. And if not, don't worry about it. See if you could still your body, quiet your mind, open your heart, and just tune into the vibration of the Sanskrit sounds. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This class is also a mythology class, and I'll be sharing with you the story about how Ganesha got his elephant head. And because he is known as the Lord of Beginnings, I will also chant an invocation to Ganesh. Om Gananam Tva Ganapate Gum Havamahe Kaving Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Anashrinvanutibisida Saranam Shri Maha Ganapataye Namaha. So again, welcome. Let's start by just getting a little bit of context. So why is Hindu mythology linked to yoga? Because they share the same foundational text known as the Vedas. And the Vedas consist of 4 books full of wisdom, philosophy, mantras, and more. And much of this wisdom has been transmitted through story form. The Veda are old. They were originally transmitted from teacher to student orally. So the Veda were old before they were ever even written down thousands of years ago. And many of the yoga postures that we practice in asana are named after the characters, the animals, and the objects from these stories. And storytelling is something that has been around us all the time. We are constantly telling stories, maybe we don't even realize it. And a story can enchant an audience, it can enchant a society or a culture or a generation or several cultures or several generations. And as the storyteller, I will try to be a bit dispassionate, but how can I not influence you, the recipient? And if it's not my bias, it's your own bias that flavors the story. We see meaning where there is none, and we miss it where there is some. Most of these mythology stories help us see the world, and they also help us see that our challenges are very real. They don't generally offer a solution, which is why they are profound. What is a myth? A myth is a story or a fable or a legend, and it usually has a hidden spiritual meaning. And the meaning is going to be different for each of us. These myth stories help put us in touch with nature and our surroundings. They help us to function in society, and they put us in touch with our human nature. They encourage us to break free from our material reality and connect with our spiritual reality. Myth stories are a part of a larger whole. They're like a little jigsaw piece in a big giant jigsaw puzzle. The stories are cyclical. There is no beginning and there is no end, or there are many beginnings and there are many ends with tons of stuff in between. And there's almost always some kind of a backstory. So in mythology, 3 is a magic number. There are 3 worlds. There are 3 different types of beings. And there are 3 gods in the Hindu trinity that represent the energies or the qualities of nature. Maybe some of you have seen a picture of these dudes before. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And they represent the qualities of creation, preservation, and destruction. They also each have a counterpart, a goddess energy, a Shakti energy, a feminine counterpart energy that complements their energy, which means there are 3 different feminine counterparts for the 3 different dudes in the Trimurti, the Hindu trinity. And they are Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth or abundance, and Parvati, the goddess of power. So here's a little backstory. This story happened ekada, or once upon a time, and it's the story that comes before the next story. This is the story of the churning of the great Milky Sky Ocean. Soon after the beginning of creation, Durvasa, known as the terrible sage, went to the palace of his uncle, or his nephew, Lord Indra, the god of the sky. Now, Indra's palace was high in the sky and it was beautiful. And in Indra's first courtyard, he kept his mighty thunderbolt weapons. Durvasa, he approached the palace and he had matted hair and road dust covering his body, and he was holding with him a dusty garland of flowers. He raised his hand and he beat upon the great door. Ho Indra, open this door and let me in. Indra answered in a voice that rumbled like thunder, who wakes me? Who calls me on this afternoon? And Durvasa answered, it is I, Durvasa, your uncle. I brought you a gift. Indra said, enter, but come no further than my first courtyard. So Durvasa, with a great heave and a great ho, he pushed open the door of the palace and he entered Indra's first courtyard. But he was a bit unnerved by Indra's frosty welcome. I mean, Durvasa is one of the 7 sons of Brahma, and he expected respect from his nephew. But Indra has this natural arrogance. He's the king of the gods. He's the king of the sky. He's very proud of that. He's proud of his palace, his status, and all the offerings that he receives. And he is having an especially good day. Indra entered the courtyard to stand before Durvasa and said, isn't my palace beautiful? It is the finest in all the heavens. Now, what is my gift? And Durvasa, he handed Indra a dusty garland of flowers. Durvasa said, this garland of flowers contains the essence of abundance and wealth. It's for you, guard it well. Well, Indra, he picked up the flower garland, thinking to himself, what would I want with a dusty garland of flowers? I live in the finest palace in all the heavens. And carelessly, with a quick flick of his wrist, he tossed the garland across the courtyard without a care in the direction where there was an elephant resting in the shade. And the elephant, he stuck out his trunk and he caught it. And then the strangest thing began to happen. The elephant began to dance. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster, round and round, with its great ears spread wide and its trunk raised all the way up to the heavens, until, whoops, it caught its toe on one of those mighty thunderbolts belonging to Lord Indra, and with a mighty crash, taking Durvasa, the terrible sage, with him, the elephant landed in a puddle on the courtyard floor. Now Indra, he raised the elephant using his big toe, but he left Durvasa to stand himself up unaided. And where they had fallen was a hint of fragrance and a flower garland stain spreading on the courtyard stones. Durvasa, he stood himself up and he made himself very tall and very straight. He was very angry. He was angry because he was embarrassed. He was embarrassed because he had fallen in front of someone that he had wanted to impress. He was also angry at Indra's carelessness with what was, after all, a divine gift. And so he cursed Indra and the gods to lose their divine powers, their strength, and their immortality. I curse you, Indra. I curse all that you have. I curse you and all that you have. I curse all your brothers and all that they have. Just as you have dishonored abundance and prosperity, those qualities will now abandon you. And just like that, the moment the sage spoke, every flower in the kingdom began to droop. Every living thing began to wilt, because the flower garland contained the essence of the goddess Lakshmi, the goddess of abundance, prosperity, and wealth. And the sage had offered this gift freely to Indra. And when Indra had tossed the flower garland across the courtyard without a care, all of those qualities left the earth. Couples began to quarrel. They became indifferent to their children. Crops stopped growing and all goodness dried up like an abandoned lake. People stopped performing acts of charity, and even the sun and the moon dimmed as a dull cloud covered the earth. Soon enough, the curse of Durvasa began to take its effect on the gods. Their strength was failing fast, and so they dragged themselves to the feet of Lord Vishnu, the eternal preserver. And when Lord Vishnu looked back in his vast awareness, he saw the moment that Indra, in his pride, had insulted the goddess Lakshmi. And Vishnu knows that Lakshmi is not the kind of goddess that's going to roar or complain or draw a sword, but she will not stay where there is harshness or pride. She simply leaves. And Vishnu sees that she has enfolded herself into the particles of the great Milky Sky Ocean. Now, this great Milky Sky Ocean was a cosmic body that was so vast and so huge. Vishnu suggests to the gods that they must churn this ocean of milk to restore a treasure that will help them restore their vitality. But the gods, their strength was failing so fast that they could not churn this ocean of milk on their own. So when they asked Lord Vishnu for help, Lord Vishnu, he took a great mountain, Mount Meru. This is a real mountain. It's called the axis of the world. And he turned it upside down and placed it in the middle of this cosmic ocean to use as the spindle of a giant churn. And then Vishnu took a great serpent from the underworld and he wound it around the mountain to use as a churning rope. Now, because the gods weren't strong enough to churn the ocean of milk on their own, they declared a temporary truce with their enemies, the demonic Asura, the demons from the underworld. The demons, they grabbed the head of the snake, and the devas, the celestials, the gods from the sky, they grabbed the tail. And then they began to pull back and forth on the head and the tail of the snake alternately. So when the gods would pull, the demons would pause. And when the demons would pull, the gods would pause. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. As they pulled back and forth on the snake, the mountain began to rotate. And as the mountain began to rotate, the ocean began to churn. Now, as the ocean began to churn, the mountain started to kind of sink down into this soft bed of milk. And so Lord Vishnu, taking the form of one of his avatars, a material incarnation of a deity on earth, this avatar was the form of a tortoise. He dove into this celestial milky sky ocean and he took the mountain onto his back. It kept the mountain afloat, and it also acted as a pivot on which the mountain could turn as it was being churned. And so again, the celestials, the gods from the sky, and the demons from the underworld began to pull back and forth and back and forth. And they pulled for like 1,000 years. before the waters of the celestial sky ocean began to coagulate and reveal a whole bunch of treasures. But most importantly, just as butter might emerge from the churning of cream, goddess Lakshmi, she slowly began to rise. She stood on a lotus flower. Her hair was flowing to her waist. She had almond eyes and honey lips. Her palms were facing forward in a gesture of bestowing prosperity. Lord Vishnu, he smiled a tender smile at her and extended his hand and said, "You are goddess Lakshmi." And he claimed her as his wife. And just like that, the crops began to grow. Couples stopped quarreling and they began to care again for their children. The sun began to regain its fiery splendor in the daytime sky, and then the moon also gleamed full in the nighttime sky. The memory of love was reborn. The gods, eventually, they began to regain their strength. And when they regained their strength, they returned back to the celestial skies, leaving the task of heaving the mountain with sore backs and aching arms back into place, and unwinding the great serpent to the demons from the underworld. Now, as that snake began to slither its way back to its underworld home, Lord Shiva, the destroyer, he picked up that snake and he knotted it, he tied it right around his waist. So maybe some of you have heard a story similar to this before. There are always many different versions of these mythology stories, little differences that people might bring to the stories. My teacher, Dave Oliver, was the one that really instilled this passion for storytelling in me, and he's the one that I learned the story from. There are lots and lots of postures that come from this particular story. We'll go through them just real quickly. The first is Durvasasana. So remember the terrible sage at the beginning of the story? There's a posture that's named after him, and we take his name, Durvasas, and we add it to the word asana, which means pose. We get Durvasasana, which means sage's pose, or the pose of the sage Durvasas. And this is the posture, excuse me. It's a foot behind the head posture while you're standing up. It's from third series, Ashtanga Yoga. And maybe some of you are Ashtanga practitioners and you might have this posture in your regular practice. In the story, we also heard about Indra's mighty thunderbolt weapons. And there are a couple of postures that are named after the thunderbolt. The Sanskrit word for thunderbolt is Vajra. And if we take the word Vajra and we add it to asana, we get Vajrasana. So here is a type of a Vajrasana posture right here. And here's an Ashtanga Supta Vajrasana. In the story, Durvasa offered Indra a garland of flowers. The garland is a mala, long ah, mala. We take mala, we add it to asana, we get malasana, the garland pose. Here's the garland pose. Named after a flower garland wreath. In the story, they approach Lord Vishnu up in the celestial sky, and he suggests that they take this mountain, they place it in the middle of the ocean, and Mount Meru is the mountain, and there's a posture that's named mountain pose. It is Tadasana, mountain pose. So here's, excuse me, the mountain and mountain pose. Vishnu took a serpent from the underworld and he wound it around the mountain to use as the churning rope. The serpent pose we know as cobra pose, and it's really translated as upper arm pose, but most of us know it as cobra pose, and it is Bhujangasana. And Lord Vishnu, he took the form of an avatar. What is an avatar? An avatar is a material incarnation of a deity on earth. And Lord Vishnu, as the preserver, he takes the form of many different avatars. Anytime harmony is under threat on the earth, Vishnu comes down in the form of one of these avatars to help set things right. And in this particular case, he took the form of a tortoise. The Sanskrit word for tortoise is kurma. So kurma plus asana is kurmasana, the tortoise pose. And the goddess in this posture was goddess Lakshmi, the goddess of abundance and all around goodness, the goddess of wealth, and not just material wealth, but spiritual wealth as well. Here is goddess Lakshmi. And probably most of us haven't had an opportunity to practice a goddess pose from time to time. So that was just a little bit of a backstory. On to the story of Hanuman the Hero. So who is Hanuman and what does he represent? If you mention Hanuman outside of a Hindu temple or maybe a yoga studio, quite possibly you might be met with kind of a blank stare. So who is he and what does he represent? This story also happened once upon a time. During the churning of the great Milky Sky Ocean, 1,000 beautiful sky maidens laughed and danced their way across the starry sky. The most beautiful of these sky maidens was named Anjane, and Anjane was as naughty as she was beautiful. She was a trickster. She was a prankster. She was always up to tomfoolery. She lived up in the celestial sky, and she would put straws of the trunks of the elephants to make them sneeze. She would pull on the tail of the peacock of Saraswati. She even stole a ride on the milk-white horse that belonged to the 7 sons of Brahma, and she even stole a sip of the elixir of immortality from the gods. Ganesha, he waved his trunk at her and said, Anjane, you will come to a bad end. And one night, when the stars were all blotted out with clouds in the sky, Anjane stole her way into the field of the 7 sons of Brahma. And there they had a very special cow, a divine milk-giving cow. And Anjane, she drank the milk from the cow's udders, and she drank the udders dry, and then she fell asleep. Now, the next morning, when the 7 sons of Brahma arrived at their field, they found Anjane asleep under the cow with the cow's udders dry, and they cursed Anjane. They said, Anjane, the reward for mischief is a long, long tail. And they booted Anjane out of the celestial sky, and she fell down, 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 all the way to the peak of the Himalaya mountains. And when she stood herself up and she sort of brushed herself off, she saw that she was now covered in soft downy fur from the top of her head to the tip of her tail. She had been turned into a monkey. Now, not very far away was the Palace of Daksha. And Daksha was one of these 7 sons of Brahma, and he was a creator dude. He was supposed to help populate the area and his surrounding area, but he had no children. He had 3 very lovely wives. Now, none of Daksha's wives were all that interested in helping him with his task. And so Daksha, he sought help from his spiritual advisors. They suggested that he build a ceremonial fire and give offerings to the gods, and so he did. And when he did, out of this ceremonial fire arose a deva, one of these celestial beings, and he offered Daksha a magical cake. He said, take this magical cake and offer it to your wives, and then they will be more interested in helping you with your task of populating the world. And so Daksha planned an occasion in the courtyard where he could offer this cake to his wives. It was a beautiful cake made of rice and sugar and melted ghee, and he cut it into 3 large pieces. He took the first piece of cake and he offered it to his first wife, his senior wife, and she smelled the cake and it smelled so nice that she took a big, big bite. And then in a seductive voice, she turned towards Daksha and she said, Daksha, when you're finished here, come and join me in my chambers. Daksha was so pleased. And so Daksha took the second piece of cake and he offered it to his second wife. It smelled so nice that she took a big bite. And then she turned towards Daksha and in a very seductive voice, she said, hey, Daksha, when you're finished here, come and join me in my chambers. So again, Daksha was so pleased. He took the third piece of cake and he offered it to his third wife. Now his third wife was the youngest of the wives, and she had watched what had happened with the two senior wives, and so she hesitated. And in her hesitation, a bird from a nearby tree swooped down and snatched that piece of cake up in its tail feathers. Now, my teacher, Dave, he was always very particular about letting us know that it was important to realize that this bird was called a kite bird. It's the kind of bird that kind of soars and glides and just hovers on the wind. And this kite bird, it soared away with a piece of cake in its tail feathers. It soared out of the kingdom of Daksha, over the hills, over the plains, over the valleys, all the way to the peak of the Himalaya mountains. Now at the peak of the Himalaya mountains, there was a big colossal tree. And in this colossal tree lived a colony of monkeys. And who do you think was sitting in the highest branches of this monkey tree? It was Anjane. Anjane was sitting in the highest branches of the monkey tree, offering her devotion to Lord Shiva. Now, as she was doing this, the kite bird at the same time was soaring overhead with a piece of cake in its tail feathers. And at this moment, Vayu, who is the wind god, stopped. And so the kite bird could soar and glide no more. The kite bird was forced to flap its wings. And when it flapped its wings, the piece of cake fell from its tail feathers. The piece of cake fell down, right into the outstretched paws of Anjane. And she was like, oh, cake, yummy, delicious cake. This must be a reward from Lord Shiva for all of my devotion. And she began to eat the piece of cake up. Meanwhile, Vayu, the wind god up in the sky, he's watching this unfold. And if you consider that Anjane was one of the most beautiful of the sky maidens, it makes sense that she also made a very attractive monkey. And Vayu was so enchanted by Anjane's beauty that he soared down and he breathed into her mouth. And he made a baby with her. And right away, Anjane could tell that something very peculiar was going on. Her belly began to swell. It swelled and it swelled and it swelled. It swelled all day long. And that very night, Anjane gave birth to a healthy baby monkey boy. Now, all the gods up in the celestial sky, they called down, they said, hey, Anjane, his name is Hanumān, and he's going to walk with the gods and talk with the gods, and he will be as swift as the wind. And so Anjane, she took that baby monkey to her breast, and she suckled that baby monkey all day long, and he grew, and he grew, and he grew. And by the next day, Hanumān had grown so big that he could no longer sit on Anjane's lap. Instead, Anjane had to sit in Hanumān's outstretched paw. Now, when Hanumān woke up, he was very, very hungry, but he was too big to nurse on Anjane anymore. And he looked up in the eastern sky and he saw a big, red, round, ripe, juicy piece of fruit. And he thought to himself, I'm going to get me that big, red, ripe, juicy fruit. It was really the rising sun. But what did Hanumān know? Hanumān, he crouched down, he wagged his tail, he struck forth his paw, and he took a big, big leap. It was a colossal leap. He leapt straight for the sun. And as he leapt for the sun, Anjane, she just danced her way back into the celestial sky. Now, Surya, who is the sun god, he's just up there, he's shining in the sky, and he sees this thing like coming towards him, hurtling towards him. And he thinks it's some kind of a demon because his hot rays seem to have no effect. And so Surya calls for help. Surya calls to Lord Indra, Indra, come and help me. And so Indra comes down, and Indra says to Hanuman, go back to the earth. But Hanuman says, no way, I'm going to get me that big, red, ripe, juicy fruit. And so Indra took one of his mighty thunderbolt weapons, and he hurled it at Hanuman, and it struck Hanuman in his jaw. It made a hole in his jaw, and his jaw began to swell to like twice its normal size. And Hanuman fell down, down, down to the earth. When Vayu saw what had happened to his son, Vayu was very upset. And so Vayu took Hanuman, and he and Hanuman away. He sealed them away in a cave. And with Vayu gone, there was no air. There was no breeze. There was no wind. And so the beings of all three worlds began to suffer. They appealed to Lord Indra and asked him to please apologize to Vayu. And so he did. Indra knelt before Lord Vayu and said, oh, gentle Vayu, I beg pardon on behalf of all creatures, great and small. Please return to the earth. And Vayu says, I will, but not without Hanuman. And so Indra gave Hanuman a reward. He made it so that Hanuman was as strong as a thunderbolt. And Vayu also gave Hanuman some special qualities. Hanuman was now as swift as the wind, or as subtle as the wind. Hanuman could change his shape and change his size. Now, Hanuman, when he was little, he had a very monkey-like mind, always swinging from tree to tree. And so the gods realized that he needed some tutoring. And so they actually asked Lord Surya, the sun god, to become Hanuman's teacher. But Surya was like, no way. I remember when that thing was coming towards me in the sky. And so Hanuman, dear, devoted, and humble Hanuman, one morning he knelt before Lord Surya. He folded his palms together and he said, Lord Surya, brilliance, magnificence, please light up my soul. And Surya became Hanuman's teacher. And later, when Hanuman tried to offer Surya some dakshina, which is the payment we give to our yoga teachers, Surya refused. But Hanuman, he found a way to honor Lord Surya through the dynamic asana sequence that we all know as Surya Namaskara, sun salutations. Now, Hanuman, he took a few really colossal leaps in his life. When Lord Vishnu came down as the avatar Rama, there's a story called the Ramayana, which are the tellings of the comings and goings of Rama. So during this time, Hanuman, he helped Rama find where his princess wife had been abducted by an evil demon by leaping all the way from southern India to Sri Lanka. And then later, there's a big, great battle on Sri Lanka, and some of the soldiers that are fighting for Rama are wounded. And so Hanuman takes another big, colossal leap. He leaps from Sri Lanka all the way to the Himalaya mountains to retrieve some life-restoring herbs. And then he leaps all the way back from the Himalayas back to Sri Lanka to bring the herbs to the wounded soldiers of Rama. So maybe some of you are familiar with Hanuman's story. If you're not familiar with his story or what he looks like, here's a picture of Hanuman. He is a symbol of courage, of strength, a devotion, and service. He is so devoted to Lord Rama that Rama is literally in his heart. And here's a picture of Hanuman bringing back the mountain peak with the life-restoring herbs. So maybe you've seen this picture before and you were like, what's going on with that picture? Well, here's Hanuman. He's leapt all the way to the peak of the Himalayas. And when he got to the peak of the Himalayas, he didn't know which herb he was supposed to bring. And so he just brought back the whole of the mountain peak. There are postures that are named after both Hanuman and his mother. Hanuman is the Hindu monkey god, a symbol of strength, devotion, humility, courage, and service. And Hanuman's posture, it looks like a big, big leap. So it's front to back split pose, not to be confused with the center splits pose, which has a different name. The front to back splits pose is named after Hanuman. So here are a couple of pictures of Hanuman Asana, here with the arms raised up overhead, and here with a forward fold. And Hanuman's mother, her name was Anjane. We take the name Anjane and we want to add it to asana. There has to be a little bit of a sound blending in between those two words, because the sound at the end of Anjane and the sound at the beginning of asana, they don't match up according to the rules of Sanskrit. And so we take Anjane and we add it to asana, and we put a little thing in the middle to blend those two sounds, and we get Anjaneyasana, Anjaneyasana. And this is like a high lunging posture. There are lots of different variations of Anjaneyasana. It's a very common posture in vinyasa classes all over the country, not just here in Phoenix, I'm sure also where you guys are too. I'm just going to assume that you guys are all doing just fine, and I'll continue with another story. So Hindu mythology is inhabited by so many divinities possessing all sorts of qualities. And Ganesha is the elephant-headed deity that we know as the remover of obstacles. He's also known as the Lord of Beginnings. Now, the funny thing about Ganesha, even though he is the remover of the obstacles, he's also the one that puts the obstacles in our path. He wants us to see that obstacles are not meant to stop you, but obstacles are meant to propel you forward. So maybe some of you have heard the story of Ganesha and how he got his elephant head. Here's a picture of Ganesha. But no matter the story that you've heard about Ganesha and how he got his elephant head, he is the devoted son of the Lord Shiva and the goddess Parvati. Now, Shiva and Parvati, they live on Mount Kailash in a little tiny house that Shiva built. And every day, goddess Parvati would retire to her bathing room. Now, Parvati's beauty was of a very rare and unusual kind. It didn't come from like her long flowing hair or her beautiful toned skin or her curvy form. It came from deep inside, and it radiated outward. And every morning she would retire to her bathing room, and she would fold her legs into lotus pose as the sun began to rise, and she would look deep into the corners of her mind to find the nature of her being. And she really loved this time, the peace that it brought her, that peace that would stay with her all day long. Lord Shiva said to Parvati, "What do you do in your bathing room?" And she answered, "Why, I bathe." And he said, "Oh, I think you do more than that." Now, the next day, when Parvati went to her bathing room, she was a little bit worried that very soon Lord Shiva would want to come and disturb her. And as she sat there with her legs folded in lotus pose, her left foot lying on top of her right thigh, she was rubbing her left foot, and she thought to herself, "If only I had a son to watch the door." And as she rubbed on her foot, little tiny bits of skin came loose. And she took those little tiny bits of skin and she rolled them into a little tiny ball. And then she shaped that little ball into a little tiny human form. And then she thought to herself, "Well, now you have your son." And then she sprinkled that tiny gray glob with water that she kept in a vessel on her shelf, water from the holy river Ganges. And what do you think happened to that gray glob? it grew. It grew and it grew and it grew. And in just a matter of days, there stood a handsome and mustached young warrior, arms folded, guarding Parvati's bathing room door. One morning, Shiva awoke bright and early, intent on visiting Parvati in her bathing room. But when he got there, he found that the door was tight shut. And so he gave it a little push. And then he pushed a little bit harder. And he made a little tiny gap. And he put his eye close up. And as he peeked through, he saw not the soft, curvy form of Parvati, but the hard limbs and the curling mustache of her son. Who's this? Shiva roared, and he forced the door. Parvati said, he is my son. And Shiva said, you may have no son without my blessing. And Parvati said, I need no blessing. He is my son and my son alone. Well, Shiva, he said, step aside, boy. But that boy, he stood there, arms folded, not budging an inch. Shiva drew his sword. And he said, step aside, boy, or I'm going to cut you down. And that boy, he stood there guarding Parvati's door. And so with a mighty swoosh, Shiva cut off this young man's head. The head went rolling into the corner, and there stood the body of this boy with a stream of water shooting out of its neck. Shiva turned to Parvati and said, water, no blood? And Parvati said, it is the purest of all, water from the holy river Ganges. Well, now Shiva is quite embarrassed, quite ashamed at his horrible, terrible, violent behavior. And so he says to Parvati, how can I fix it? How can I stem it? And Parvati says, you must do 3 things. And Shiva says, oh, I will. And Parvati says, first, you must apologize. And Shiva says, oh, I do, I apologize to you. And Parvati says, I forgive you, but you must comply with the other 2 things, or that water is going to flow and flow and flow and flow until there's nothing more. She said, you must promise to never disturb me when I'm spending time in my bathing room. And Shiva said, oh, I do, I promise never to bother you in your bathing room again. And she said, and thirdly, you must replace the head of my son. But the head had been totally destroyed. And so Parvati said, well, then you better get a different head. And so Shiva, he strode out of Parvati's bathing room, through the house, out through the kitchen to the kitchen courtyard, where there was an elephant waiting for its loads to be removed. And for the second time in one morning, Shiva, whoosh, cut off a head. He cut off this elephant's head, and he took the elephant head back to the bathing room of Parvati, and with great surgical skill, united so that not a joint could be seen, he attached the elephant head to the body of the boy. And then using all of his divine powers, all of his heat, all of his tapas, all of his austerities, he brought the boy back to life. Now, in the kitchen, there was a little mouse that was watching this unfold. And this little tiny mouse thought to himself, why, that head is much too large for a normal set of human legs. And so I'm going to offer myself as a second pair of legs. And so that elephant-headed boy, he rode out on the back of this kitchen mouse. Now, goddess Parvati had not given her son a name, but the world began to know him as Ganesha, and he too became a great, great god. So that's just one version of how Ganesha got his elephant head. Like I said before, there are many different variations, and every time I tell the story, I feel like it comes out just a little bit different. But no matter, that is one of the stories of how Ganesha got his head. Now, sometimes we might sort of resonate with a particular deity, and this can fluctuate during our lives. I know that there have been times where I've felt like I really resonated with the qualities of Vishnu, and sometimes I felt like I really resonated with the qualities of Lakshmi. But right now, my particular favorite deity is Hanumān. And when you have a particular favorite deity, that deity becomes your Ishta Devata, your favorite deity. So this is who you might sort of pray to when you need some help or some encouragement along the way. And I know that the qualities of Hanumān have helped me tremendously overcome some challenges that I've had over the last year or two in my own personal life. So I wanted to finish with just one more story, and this is a story that my teacher, Dave Oliver, would share to teach us a lesson about worthiness. And it's a story about a little squirrel. So in the Ramayana, Rama, who is the prince, he has to build a bridge to Sri Lanka. And he recruits the help of many, including animals such as bears and elephants. And these elephants are pulling up huge tree trunks to use to build the structure of the bridge. And bears are pulling up massive pieces of granite to also use to build the structure of the bridge. And there are monkeys down by the shore, and they're mixing up cement, and with string and measuring sticks, they're planning out the width and the breadth of the bridge. And there's also crocodiles and birds, and they're all contributing to the building of this bridge. In addition, there is one little tiny squirrel. Now this little squirrel, he's really quick and he's really adept, and he runs and races up and down the beach. He is darting in between the massive legs of the elephant, and he is dodging the huge feet of the bears. And as he runs up and down the beach, he is gathering and also contributing these little fistfuls of pebbles. Now, probably the other animals don't really see when the squirrel empties his fistfuls of pebbles, how those little tiny pebbles sail down through the water and fill in all the little tiny cracks and gaps in the bridge, helping to make it stronger. But maybe they don't realize that that's what's happening under the water. And so Hanumān, who is actually the hero of the story, he sees this and he tells the little squirrel, he says, "Hey, little squirrel, get back to the jungle where you belong. This is no place for you." And Rama, dear, sweet, soulful, wise Rama, he says, Hanumān, no, all efforts are worthy, no matter how big and no matter how small. And after that, Rama, he scoops up that tiny little squirrel. And while he stands at his perch directing the workers to build the bridge, he's telling the elephants and the bears and the monkeys what to do. With his other hand, he's holding this little tiny squirrel, and he pets this little squirrel over the roundness of its head, down the slope of its back, all the way to the tip of its little tiny tail. And he pets this little squirrel all day long. And my teacher, Dave, would say that this was how the squirrel earned his stripes. And they are called Rama stripes, and they are a symbol of worthiness. And we are all worthy, no matter how great and no matter how small. And whether you realize it or not, this experience here today could not have happened without each and every one of you. So I really appreciate you being here today. I really appreciate your interest in the mythology and your willingness to tune in and to open your heart and to open your mind to the mythology behind some of the yoga poses. So the traditional closing mantra for a non-asana class is called Purnamada. And if you know this chant at the home, in the privacy of your own home, you can certainly join me. And if you aren't familiar with the chant, don't worry about it. Just sit still, maybe close your eyes, and see if you could resonate with the vibrations of the Sanskrit. Invite the sounds to wash over and to wash through you. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day wherever you are, and namaste.
Thank you.